Another week, boys, and another TWAB. Fellas, this is a big one. A lot of updates have been put out, not just from today's TWAB, but directly from Twitter. We're going to be covering everything today, so let's jump right into this. This week at Bungie, Trials is back on the menu. It's been an exciting week. You all came together and donated your stockpile of Fractaline to the ongoing effort to build the new lighthouse and usher in the return of Trials of Osiris next season. As soon as the final stage was complete, you were invited to survey the completion of the project and light the beacon. We saw your signal as our cue to release this developer insight video confirming what many have been speculating for a while now. To follow the video, Luke Smith wrote another director's cut that covered a few topics, including our philosophy on seasons and some challenges in sustaining a game with weapons that last forever. Similar to the 3-part epic he put out last year, it contains a lot of important info you won't want to miss. Yeah, and if you have not seen any of those things, down below in the description will be links to both of those videos. They're kind of long, but we pretty much went into each one of those topics, both the developer insight as well as the director's cut. Now moving on, Subclass Changes. Oh boy. Get kind of nervous, man. With the return of Trials and a new season on the way, we're planning to shake things up with some changes to your Guardian abilities. The dev team has the details. So from the dev team, hey Guardians, Trials is coming back, and the combat systems team has been hard at work preparing Destiny 2 for its arrival. We've made a number of big changes to the ability sandbox, and instead of simply dropping them all in the patch notes, we wanted to take this opportunity to offer some transparency for our decision-making process. Oh boy. Before we begin, we want to give a big shout out to the data scientists here at Bungie. They provide us with mountains of valuable data to sift through, from the win rates of each subclass in each Crucible game to kills per minute of each weapon on each platform in each PvE activity. This data allows us to make sure we're making informed decisions when balancing the game. It allows us to separate the perceived power of abilities, weapons, and armor from their true objective power. But the data doesn't always tell the whole story, and we believe strongly that perceived power and community sentiment are just as important as cold, hard data. Even as Trials returns, we're committed to maintaining a fun and fair sandbox for both PvP and PvE, and we've considered data for all game modes when making these adjustments. So first up on the menu, Warlock melees. Warlocks have long been at a disadvantage in melee fights because it takes them slightly longer than Titans and Hunters to recover from making a melee attack. So next season, we're extending the Warlock's basic melee range by 1 meter to a total of 5.5 meters. Warlocks will still melee slightly slower than the other classes, but they'll now have a 1 meter advantage. If you can use this window to land the first melee attack in a slap fight, you'll likely emerge victorious. We feel this is a more interesting solution to melee disparity than homogenizing all of the melee attacks, and we'll be studying the data as it rolls out to make sure it's balanced. So essentially, they're giving it the D1 treatment, right? Now, I don't think Warlocks melee slower, but yes, frame by frame, Warlocks do melee slower than Titans and Hunters. Meaning, if you're a Warlock and you go to melee that Hunter and you both melee at the same exact time, that Hunter will follow up with the second melee faster than you can. So their answer to this is actually to give us an extra meter there in base default melee. And what I mean by base default melee, I'm assuming that that extra meter is obviously going to stack with certain melees that hit further by default. Things like Chain Lightning on Stormcaller, Atomic Breach on Voidwalker. Not sure if there's other melees that hit further, but way back when, the meta at one time, at least in Destiny 1, was the shotgun melee combo, which I think we're actually going to full circle come back to that. We don't know how bad shotguns are going to get nerfed, but it's very apparent that all shotguns are going to get a blanket nerf to range. So having this extra meter there in your melee might be a lot more important next season than you think. Moving on, Titan barricades. Oh, are we getting a buff finally? A Titan barricade is incredibly powerful in Trials because you can use it to safely resurrect your fallen teammates. Next season, we're creating counters to the barricade while also raising its health from 500 hit points to 600. Barricades will now take extra damage from special ammo weapons, anti-barrier weapons, and certain heavy weapons. This change makes barricades sturdier while giving opposing players the option to use their special ammo to bring down barricades more quickly. So the following weapons now do 30% extra damage to barricades: sniper rifles, grenade launchers, linear fusion rifles, machine guns, trace rifles, anti-barrier weapons. The following weapons now do 60% extra damage to barricades: shotguns, fusion rifles. You'll see the yellow damage numbers when hitting a barricade with a counter weapon, which always feels good. Really? I thought this was going going to be a buff. The hell, Bungie? 100 HP is not going to mean jack when a Revoker's sitting in the back nailing my barricade over and over again. Do you already know what Lord of Wolves does to a barricade? It just slices straight through it like butter. Let's just move on. One-shot abilities. With the introduction of the Hunter's Weighted Knife in Season of Dawn, each class now has a neutral game ability that can kill PvP opponents in one hit. We've taken a pass at all of the one-shot abilities to tune their risk-reward factor. We'll warn you that some of these changes look extreme on paper, but we made a point to make sure these abilities retain their overall feel. Oh, that's very nice of you, Bungie. Quite political. Yes. For the Titan's 3 shoulder charge abilities, we reduced the auto-targeting angle by 50%. That might sound like a lot, but acrobatic Titans could previously auto-target to make an instant 90-degree turn. We also adjusted the lunge distance to 5.5 meters for both targeted and untargeted lunges. Targeted lunges were previously 6 meters, while untargeted lunges were previously 4.5 meters. These changes make for more consistent experiences while lunging. So we had to sit and think about this one for a second. Yes, it is a nerf. I mean, hands down it's a nerf to shoulder charge. A 50% there reduction in auto-targeting is going to result in you shoulder charging past your enemy and looking like an idiot. I guess where they're kind of making up for it is they tack on an extra meter for untargeted lunges. But doesn't that contradict the 50% reduction in auto-targeting? So is this more of a buff or a nerf? I would say definitely more of a nerf. This TWAB is terrible for Titans, man. Now for Hunter's Weighted Knife, we reduced its tracking significantly and created new tracking tech that will make the knife more faithful to its initial throw trajectory. All right, let me just understand this, because everything I'm reading right now is like contradicting itself literally 4 or 5 words later. They've reduced the tracking, but they allow for the tracking tech to remain faithful to the initial throw trajectory. All right, so you know when you actually throw a weighted knife, you know how sometimes, like me especially when I throw a knife, I have to actually like aim left or right, moving my reticle past the opponent because of the travel time of my knife. Now what they're saying, at least what I'm reading here, is that it should go wherever your reticle is at, right? As in your initial trajectory. But on the other side of things, they're reducing the tracking significantly. Very subjective. We'll just have to mess around with it and see. As for the Warlock handheld supernova, we've made a number of changes to bring this ability in line with the other one-shot abilities. While part of handheld supernova's strength lies in its pairing with Controverse Hold, which are also being tuned this season, our data indicates that even with Controverse Hold, handheld supernova needs to be adjusted. Here are the changes. Increase activation time by 0.6 seconds. Reduce the hold time from 3.5 seconds to 2.5. Reduce range by 20%. Tighten horizontal spread of bolts by 25%. Bolt explosion now does self-damage. Oh wow. Reduce bolt explosion radius from 3 meters to 2.5 meters. In our playtesting, we found that the product of these changes is an ability that is still incredibly strong, but now has a risk-reward ratio to commensurate with its power. After all, this thing can vaporize multiple PvP opponents instantly. There's even a bit of silver lining here. The tightening of the bolts leads to more concentrated damage at range, improving its viability against supers. To compensate for this change, other elements of Middle Voidwalker path are being buffed, including the Nova Warp Super, which now has increased damage resistance, a longer duration, and reduced blink costs. Fantastic. There you go, Warlocks. You got some adjustments to your handheld supernova, but you got an improved super. Now moving on. General subclass tuning. We've made changes to a number of subclass paths in an effort to tighten the gameplay balance. For example, Stormcaller top, Striker bottom, and Arcstrider bottom have remained dominant in PvP for multiple seasons now, consistently beating out all the other paths in both win rate and average efficiency. These paths have also ranked among the top PvE paths in terms of kills per minute. We've adjusted these paths and others to bring them closer to middle of the pack. On the other end of the spectrum, paths such as Voidwalker bottom, Night Stalker bottom, and Striker middle needed some love, so we've taken steps to lift them up. In the spirit of transparency, we take no joy in nerfing the abilities, weapons, and armor that we all love to use. We wish the answer to keeping the game balanced and fresh was always to buff the underperforming elements, but such an approach leads to power creep, the slow and steady increase of the average power of everything in the game, which trivializes the incredible game modes and encounters that the other teams at Bungie work hard to create. After all, as Destiny players ourselves, we go home and play the game too, and we want the game to be as fun and as healthy as possible. That's it from us today. You'll find more details about these changes and more when the patch notes drop in early March. Oh yeah, and Hunter trip mines are sticky again. Stay sharp, Guardians. As promised, in addition to these explanations, there will be patch notes when the new season begins. Those should give you a full illustration of how the game is changing. Until they arrive, we hope you enjoyed this preview. Wow, that's actually surprising. We might get a small preview next week, but normally Bungie will actually disclose everything up front before throwing it into the patch notes on the day of release, which tells me they're doing some last minute changes right now. By the way, trip mines being sticky again. Hey, come on, hunters. You can't be all mad. At least your barricade didn't get shat on. Now moving on, we have some new Twitch Prime rewards, the Poultry Petting, Praxic Finery, Age of Tomorrow Shell, and the Trials of Osiris. So if you got Twitch Prime, get your freebie rewards today. Moving on. End of the season. With the Imperium Foundation restored, the last triumph to acquire, the Savior Seal has been unlocked. Players completing this seal should claim and equip it to ensure it isn't removed when Season of the Dawn ends on March the 10th. Remember guys, as the season concludes, you cannot earn that title, ever. Outside of that, we have some upcoming resolved issues that will be addressed on March 10th when the new season kicks off. Now before we go, let's talk about the big one, Trials. So Luke Smith actually took to Twitter. He stated, "We will be disabling the artifact for power-enabled PvP, Iron Banner, and Trials until we can implement a power cap feature. This cap will allow us to weave artifact and power pursuit together while preventing unbound power growth in PvP." He continues, "Somewhere down the road, but before we implement the cap, we're going to talk about what effect power has on combat in PvP. Think deep dive, numbers, etc. All of that is way more info than Twitter can handle. See you soon." So I'm assuming we may actually be looking at another director's cut, maybe within the next week or so. But just know that Trials will still be power enabled, at least if I'm reading that correctly. It's just the artifact itself will not be tied to that, meaning it'll be just like Destiny 1. There'll be a cap, which would most likely be what, 970, maybe 980. So to reach that cap is still going to be very important, but for the person out there that is macroing or botting their way through lost sectors, they won't have a huge competitive edge over normal folks inside of Trials, which I think is excellent. This needed to happen, guys. I'm sure at some point we may have a better system that involves artifacts, but as of right now, with Trials literally right around the corner, we can't have this. So guys, that is our TWAB today. I was actually expecting a little more to be here. Seems like they wanted to cover just the subclass changes today, as well as like one-hit kill abilities, as those are like the standout things for something like Trials. I'm assuming next week, if we get one more preview, there'll probably be some exotic armor changes, as well as the changes they spoke of when talking about subclasses, because it's obvious that they're going to be trying to buff those underused subclasses. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.